The climate zones. Climate zones are largely determined by two main factors, and that's temperature and rainfall. Now, the Köppen climate classification system is a system for classifying the world's climates, and this is based on temperature and rainfall. There are six main climate zones that we're going to focus on. Now, there are others. Now, some resources will combine some of these. Some resources may exclude the highlands, which are the mountain ranges, but we're going to focus generally on these six zones. These six zones will have subcategories or subzones, which we will talk about. As we said, the climate zones include the tropical region, the dry, which is also known as the arid zone, the temperate marine zone, which I've seen written down as the temperate warm, which also has a subzone of the Mediterranean. We then have the temperate continental, which is also called the temperate cold, but also many times in many resources been written as subpolar. So temperate continental has three zone names: temperate continental, temperate cold, and subpolar are all the same thing. Then we have the polar zone, and then intermixed within all of these zones, we have the highlands or the mountain ranges. So dry, tropical, temperate continental can all have these mountain ranges, as well as temperate marine and polar. We're going to start off very general, then we're going to get a little more detailed. And then as you can see, this is not as black and white as the previous slide, which was very sectioned off. We can see that it's very intermixed. And then even here, this is the Köppen climate classification. It is even more detailed and specific. This is a temperature classification identifying that along the equator it's going to be very warm, and then closer to the poles it's going to be very hot. In the same way, if we talk about precipitation, you can see along the equator we have a high amount of precipitation. As it gets closer to the poles, we generally will have less. Here's a climograph. The bar graph is going to focus on rainfall, while the line graph will focus on temperature. So bar graph, precipitation; line graph, temperature. Now you will need to know the climographs for each of these climates, what they look like, as well as the subcategories or subclimates. So the tropical climate will include tropical wet and dry, as well as the tropical wet climate. So we have two subclimates here, the tropical wet and dry climate, as well as the tropical wet climate. So make sure you're aware of the descriptions of each of these subzones. You can see here in the climograph very high temperature, high amounts of rainfall. Then we have the dry or arid climates. We're going to divide this into two parts or two subclimates: the basic desert or arid environment, as well as the semi-arid or steppe. You can see here in the climograph high temperature, low precipitation. Now the temperate warm, which is also called the temperate marine environment, this climate has a mild winter. Now all of these, which there are a total of three that we're going to focus on, one is the marine west coast, which is specifically maybe found in San Francisco, the subtropical, which is usually the east coast continents, okay, not on the west but on the east, and then we have the Mediterranean. So these are mainly coastal environments, meaning an average temperature range. Warmer winters, cooler summers, mild winters. Then we have the temperate cold winter climate. Remember, the temperate cold can be referred to as the subpolar or temperate continental. As you can see in the climograph, okay, there's a large range between the winter and summer, and a pretty average amount of precipitation. Not a lot though. Then we have the higher northern locations in Canada, Russia, Greenland. This is going to include the ice caps as well as the tundra. Very low precipitation, very low temperature, but there can be a temperature range in the summer, getting it and making it warmer. Alaska is not completely under ice. No, it has very nice, beautiful summers as ice melts and so on.